Senator Nesiba, thanks for joining me.
Great. Thanks for having me here, Lee. Always an honor.
There was an article that came out over the weekend about the governor's plane travel. You spent the better part of a decade and a half bringing a ballot measure and stuff like that related to the governor's use of state planes. Do you have any response maybe to that article and what you've seen?
Yeah. I do remain troubled about the way the governor has been using our state airplane. Back in 2006, we put it was initiated measure number 5 that was on the ballot. It passed 55% to 45% by the people of South Dakota, and it was just a short piece of code that said to limit the use of the state airplane fleet to state business. And after that, we saw then Governor Rounds curtail his use of the state airplane and using commercial flights when appropriate. Governor Dugard simply didn't use it that much. I think he actually sold some of our state airplanes. But Governor Noem does seem to be using the state airplane more and seems to take the position that everything she does is related to state business. And I think many people look at it and see it either as a personal benefit or as a political benefit.
Great, thank you. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the state budget this year. The Joint Appropriations Committee met last week to set budget projections. Last week, the governor also spoke before a joint session of the state legislature to talk about even further increased revenues than originally anticipated. So what can you tell me about where the legislature is sitting in terms of budget projections and how that's kind of playing out right now?
Right. So this is unprecedented. The state of South Dakota has never had so much what we refer to as one-time money for us to spend on one-time projects. So not necessarily ongoing, but for one-time money. And I do feel really good about the process we have in state government. What we do is we hear from the Bureau of Finance and Management. They have their economists come in and talk through sort of an overview of where they see the economy going, and they give their revenue projection, and it is a forward-looking model. They run some regressions and make predictions about all of the categories, most importantly about where our sales tax number is going to be, where our excise tax the contractor's excise tax is going to be, and a number of other things. Then we also have the person who is our fiscal analyst from the Legislative Research Council uses a completely different model. His is a backward-looking model, referred to as Holt-Winter and an ARIMA model, that really looks at how close the data fits his model. And then we compare those two, and then we have a subgroup that gets together and sort of negotiates, trying to make arguments about which number we think is better from each of those, and we come up with a number. And in this case, this year, I think both of the numbers we came up with were really conservative. So the number at the bottom of the page, when we looked at the number from BLM and LRC, was actually lower than both of their numbers. And then in 2022, we picked a number that was actually $23 million less than that. And I think that's just overly pessimistic. I think that in 2022 we will see an increase in revenue, and that there was an awful lot of politics to simply tamp down our estimate. And I think that our job as an appropriations committee should be to try and pick the most accurate number. But I think instead what we did is we picked a number that was significantly lower than the 2021 number.
Last week I had a chance to ask the governor about where her office, the Bureau of Finance and Management, was coming from in terms of the numbers that they were bringing. And I'd like to play the clip from last week's press conference real quick. Speaking of the budget, could you talk a little bit about how your office sees sort of the state budget playing out in years to come, as opposed to maybe how the LRC is seeing it and as that's being set?
Well, I can speak specifically to revenue numbers. This year we have increased revenue that is coming in, and you're seeing some debate over appropriation bills and where those dollars should be spent. In coming years, I expect our budget to get tighter. We are seeing historic levels of money come into the state right now through several different elements. Through some stimulus money that came from the federal government, also from increased visitation to our state, and from people being out there starting businesses and doing a lot of different building projects as well. There's, to say that it is specifically tied to the federal stimulus dollars would probably be inaccurate, because then every single state in this country that received federal stimulus dollars should be seeing a surplus as well. I think that the way we've approached the pandemic and the way we've allowed businesses to operate and families to operate has resonated with folks, and they've chosen to come here and visit and invest money, and our economy is benefiting from that. What I would say is that because we're seeing unprecedented growth in our revenue right now, I don't expect that to continue. I think we'll still have a strong economy, but we need to be prudent and smart and plan for the future and know that those revenues will more than likely decline. And I would much rather have money in reserves today than come back 2 to 3 years from now and be asking everyone for spending cuts. I know once you invest money into programs, people hate to see that reduced in the future, and it's much more difficult.
So Senator Nesiba, I was wondering, based on what you just heard there, what kind of response you have to what the governor was saying?
Right. Well, I would disagree with the governor. I would say that the main reason that we have so much one-time money was really a result of federal policy. We had direct payments from the Treasury that were a benefit to the state. We saw farm commodity payments to producers. We saw the enhanced $600 per week for those on unemployment insurance. And then we also had this CARES Act spending of $1.25 billion, which was 3 or 4 times more per person than in many other states, like, say, Minnesota. And so one of the reasons that our economy did as well as it did is because of that injection of somewhere between $3 and $4 billion worth of spending. And it's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic looking forward to 2022. That right now going through Congress is a proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus from the Biden administration that is, I think, likely to pass. And so that's going to give another injection into our economy. And I think we should just simply all acknowledge that South Dakota is a huge beneficiary. And even in a typical year, we get more money from the federal government than we raise in our own source revenue when we're putting together our $5 billion budget.
As we head out of fiscal year 21, which is in July, and head into fiscal year 22, what makes you so optimistic about the position of the state?
Right. And to be clear, we are on a fiscal year, so that when we're talking about the 2021 budget, we're talking about the budget year that's going to end June 30th. And when we're talking about the 2022 budget, we're really talking about the budget that begins July 1st of this year and will end June 30th of 2022. And I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism. One is the high likelihood that we're going to get a significant stimulus from the federal government. The second thing is simply having vaccines rolling out. You know, by this fall, people are going to feel safer about being able to get in their car and go on a vacation or stay in a hotel and go out to a restaurant or a bar or go see a concert again. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. I haven't been to a movie theater for over a year, and I really look forward to being able to go back to the movies or to be able to see a play in person. And I think that I don't think I'm alone in that.
The governor was not so optimistic in the clip that I had just played. You know, she talked a lot about federal regulation and federal energy policy as a reason why they're not as optimistic as maybe you are for fiscal year 22. Could you maybe respond to her lack of optimism?
Yeah, you oftentimes hear Republicans, talking about a Democratic administration as if, Barack Obama is going to, his presidency is going to be a terrible thing, or that Obama is going to come and take your guns away, or that these are claims that are just exaggerations, and maybe they do play into politics, or they help get attention, but I just think they're simply not true. And it isn't as though regulations, what we have to look at is, are the regulations appropriate or not? Sometimes regulations do make a lot of sense. I think most of us appreciate that there is a Food and Drug Administration that makes sure that the drugs that we purchase are going to be safe, or that our meat is inspected, and that schools have accreditation. There's a whole variety of things and safeguards that we put into our economy that I think most people would agree with are appropriate and good. And it's possible. I mean, the governor's made it clear that she's really upset about the XL pipeline, but I think that South Dakota really has a lot of strength in terms of being able to produce ethanol, to be able to produce wind energy. This could be really good. We're not a fossil fuel producing state. We are a sustainable energy state, particularly when you look at all the electricity we generate from our hydroelectric dams. So I think this could really be good for South Dakota.
Governor Nome does want to use some of the one-time money that we talked about early on in this conversation to further roll out broadband, pump some money into the Brittle Fund, speaking of dams, dam repair, and various other infrastructure projects that she says she wants to be in place, decades into the future, 2 or 3 decades into the future. Where do Democrats sit in terms of those types of one-time spending that she's looking at?
Yeah, and the governor and Democrats agree on a number of things, and maybe that doesn't help increase TV ratings, but I think that Democrats generally are supportive of broadband. We've been talking about the need for a need-based grant scholarship program for a long time, so I'm enthusiastic about her $50 million ask for that. I would have structured it differently. We already have an existing need-based grant program inside of the Education Trust Fund, and it already has rules promulgated, and we could have just put the money in there and used that distribution mechanism. But because of the First Premier donation, I understand why we're moving in a different direction with that. Also with the Brittle Fund, that we do have software that we have written years ago that need to be updated and make sure that we make sure that it's secure. We do have a whole bunch of information about South Dakotans, and we need to make sure that that private information remains private in that sense of we don't want to be able to have security breaches that release people's private information that they've shared with state government.
Are there any final thoughts that you have about sort of the state budget and the budget setting process? I mean, I know setting the budget is the easiest part. Now comes the harder part.
Right. So right now that we've set the budget, the revenue number for 2021 and 2022, now the hard work really begins because we have the numbers, we know how much money we have to spend in this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. So now we can start moving those budgeted appropriations in there, and then we start making the hard decisions that we have to be within that constraint, and that's where we have to decide what our priorities are. From the Democratic perspective, I think our priorities are, in terms of one-time money, or that $50 million spending for the need-based grant would be right up there, and we are generally supportive of broadband across the state of South Dakota, and glad to see that we could use some federal money to do that, so it wasn't the entire $100 million, but $75 million now that we could use to do that, or some share of that. I'm not sure that 75 is the perfect number, but we're working on that. And then our priorities going forward is I've been continuing to call for a 3% across the board increase for teachers, for state employees, for might need more than that actually for our community support providers and our technical colleges. And then we do need some additional attention for community support providers who are taking care of the developmentally disabled. I think that's a priority for us. State employees right now are facing a new insurance plan that is going to increase premiums, and I think it might be useful to take some of that one-time money and actually use that to subsidize state employees for the next 2 or 3 years because of these increase in premiums. If we don't do anything, there's going to be a number of state employees who are going to see increases in premiums, and those premiums going up more than their cost of living adjustment, and they'll be going backwards. And it's already an ongoing struggle for us to be able to recruit and retain state employees. So I hope that we can do something to ameliorate the pain from that new insurance program that seems to be coming.
I'm sure we'll be talking about all this and more in the next few weeks, so everybody
Great.
Stay tuned. State Senator Nesiba, Reynold Nesiba of Sioux Falls, thank you so much for joining me on Peer to Peer.
Always an honor, Lee. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'll see you in the Capitol.